The air in Interrogation Room 3 was a physical presence, a thick, suffocating blanket woven from the threads of stale coffee, industrial-grade bleach, and the faint metallic tang of human desperation. It clung to the skin and settled in the lungs. Overhead, a long fluorescent bulb hummed a single monotonous note, casting a sterile, unforgiving light that bleached all color from the small, windowless space. It was a room designed to strip away comfort, to amplify silence, and to break the will of those who sat at its cold metal table. At that table, Detective Marcus Miller felt perfectly at home. He was a man built like a bulldog, his thick neck straining against the collar of a shirt that had been crisp hours ago but was now wilting under the oppressive humidity of the precinct. His ego was a tangible force, an invisible pressure that seemed to suck the already thin air from the room, leaving little for anyone else. He leaned forward, his weight on his forearms, the polished surface of his watch catching the harsh light. His gaze, a pair of hard, cynical points, was fixed on the man sitting opposite him. That man was Elias Thorne. To the casual observer, Elias was a ghost, a sketch of a person who seemed to occupy less space than he should. His clothes, a threadbare sweater over a faded t-shirt, hung loosely on his thin frame. His hair was an unkempt dark shock, and his face, pale and etched with a weariness that went far beyond lack of sleep, was mostly still. His hands rested in his lap, unnaturally calm, but it was his eyes that were the most unsettling. They were a pale, washed-out blue, and they did not seem to be looking at Detective Miller or the table or the scuffed gray walls. They seemed to be looking at everything at once, at the past and the present, at the dust motes dancing in the light, and the memories swirling behind his own gaze. He was a canvas onto which the world had painted too much, and the layers were beginning to show through. He had been a witness to a brutal murder 2 nights prior, a high-profile killing in a downtown alley, and he was the only one the initial patrol had found at the scene, staring at the wall. "Let's go over this one more time, Elias." Miller's voice was a low growl, a sound like gravel being churned in a cement mixer. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed, a voice that assumed its own authority without question. "You were there. You saw something. Just tell me what you saw." He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if to a child or a simpleton. Elias blinked, a slow, languid motion. The focus of his pale eyes shifted, reluctantly anchoring itself to the present, to the detective's impatient face. His own voice, when it came, was soft, a near whisper, yet it carried a strange resonance in the dead air of the room. "I remember everything," he said. It was not a boast. It was not a claim. It was a simple, unadorned statement of fact, delivered with the same weight as one might say, "The sky is blue," or "The table is cold." A smirk tugged at the corner of Miller's mouth. It was a practiced, dismissive expression he reserved for junkies, liars, and the mentally unstable. It was a tool of his trade. "Right, everything." He leaned back in his chair, the metal groaning in protest. "Contraband." That was the word from the initial report. Elias had been diagnosed years ago, schizophrenic. The label was a lead weight tied to his testimony, dragging it down into the depths of inadmissibility before it ever had a chance to float. "Look, kid, I don't have time for games. A man is dead, a very important man. So how about you try to remember something useful? Like a face, a license plate, something that actually helps me." In the corner of the room, almost part of the shadows, sat Detective Isabella Rossi. She was younger than Miller, her presence a quiet counterpoint to his overbearing one. Where he was all bluster and force, she was observation and stillness. She held a pen over a notepad, but for the last 10 minutes, she hadn't written a word. She was watching Elias not as a diagnosis on a sheet of paper, but as a person. She saw the minute tremor in his hand, the way his eyes tracked unseen things in the air, but she also saw the unnerving lucidity that settled over him when he spoke. There was no mania in his voice, no disjointed rambling. There was just a quiet, profound certainty. Her professional curiosity, the part of her that had made her a detective in the first place, was a tingling sensation at the base of her neck. Something was different here. Elias's gaze drifted past Miller toward the two-way mirror on the wall. He wasn't looking at his own reflection, but through it. He wore a gray coat, cashmere, double-breasted. 3 buttons on the cuff of the right sleeve, but only 2 on the left. One was missing. The thread was still there, a small dark X of navy blue thread. His shoes were Italian leather, Oxfords, size 10, maybe 10.5. There was a small scuff on the toe of the left shoe, shaped like a tiny crescent moon. Miller rolled his eyes so hard it was an audible effort. Cashmere coats and Italian shoes in a filthy alley? What is this, a movie? Give me a break. He was holding a pen, Elias continued, his voice unwavering, his focus still on that infinite point beyond the wall. A silver fountain pen, a Mont Blanc, I think. Meisterstück Legrand, platinum-coated clip. It had a small eagle engraved just below the clip. It wasn't standard. It was a custom edition. He clicked the cap on and off 3 times. The sound was very specific. A soft, solid thump click. Not a snap. An eagle on a pen, Miller scoffed, shaking his head and looking at the two-way mirror as if to an unseen audience. He was performing now, showcasing his dominance over the situation, over this broken witness. You remember a tiny eagle on a pen, but you can't give me a hair color? A height? An age? 5 feet 11 inches, Elias said instantly, his tone flat. 185 pounds, give or take. Hair was dark brown, cut short, styled with a light pomade that smelled of sandalwood and bergamot. There was a single gray hair just above his right temple. His age was 47. I saw the date of birth on the driver's license when he opened his wallet to check the time. He didn't wear a watch. He used his phone, but first, he looked at his license, as if to remind himself of who he was. April 12th, 1977. The room went silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent bulb seemed to hold its breath. Miller's smirk faltered, just for a second. The level of detail was absurd. It was the kind of thing a liar would invent, but the delivery was all wrong. There was no desperate need to be believed, no pleading in Elias's eyes. He was simply reporting. He was a camera playing back a recording. From her corner, Rossi finally wrote something down. Sandalwood and bergamot. April 12th, 1977. They were details, absurdly specific, but they were testable. They were facts or they were fiction, and it was her job to find out which. Miller, however, recovered his footing quickly. His ego, momentarily pricked, reinflated with indignant force. This was a challenge to his authority, to his carefully constructed world where he was the arbiter of truth. He couldn't allow a nutcase to run his investigation. "That's cute," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've really thought this all out, haven't you? Been reading a lot of detective novels in your spare time?" He stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the tense silence. "You're wasting my time. You're wasting police resources. You know what that is? It's called obstruction." Elias finally turned his head, his pale blue eyes meeting Miller's for the first time. The effect was startling. It was like looking into the heart of a winter sky. There was no fear there, no defiance, just an immense, crystalline clarity. "The man you are looking for," Elias said softly. "His name is Julian Croft. He's a financial analyst. He lives at 1451 Arbor Lane. He has a wife named Claire and a daughter named Sophie. The license. I saw the address." This was too much. For Miller, this crossed a line from delusion into a deliberate, malicious lie designed to send him on a wild goose chase. The name of the victim was Richard Sterling, a real estate mogul. There was no Julian Croft in any of the initial reports. It was pure fantasy. "That's it. We're done," Miller barked, his face flushed a blotchy red. He gestured sharply toward the door. "You want to play games? You can play them in a holding cell. I'm charging you with obstruction of justice. Maybe a night in a cage will help you remember what's real and what's not." He turned to Rossi, his jaw tight. "Rossi, get him processed. I'm going to find a witness who actually lives on planet Earth." He stormed out of the room, the door slamming shut behind him, leaving a vibrating silence in his wake. Rossi stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked at Elias, who had not reacted to the threat. His gaze had once again drifted away, his internal world reclaiming him. She felt a knot of profound unease tighten in her stomach. Miller was a bulldozer, effective at clearing a path but utterly incapable of seeing what he crushed along the way. He saw a diagnosis, a label. She saw a man drowning in details, and she had the sinking feeling that somewhere in that ocean of information was the truth, clear and perfect, and they were all about to let it sink. "Come on, Elias," she said, her voice gentle, a stark contrast to Miller's grating tone. "Let's go." As she led him out of the room, his hands cuffed behind his back, Elias looked at her. "He dropped the pen," he whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. When he ran, it rolled under the third dumpster from the corner, the one with the graffiti of the red bird. "It's still there." The pen with the eagle. Rossi's heart hammered against her ribs. She had read the preliminary forensics report. An unidentifiable metal object had been glimpsed by the CSU team under the third dumpster, but the area was deemed unstable and hazardous, and since they already had what they thought was the murder weapon, a knife found near the body, it was logged as a low-priority item to be retrieved later. No one had mentioned a pen. No one. The detail was too specific. It was impossible. Unless it was true. The injustice of it was a bitter taste in her mouth. Miller's public humiliation of Elias, his arrogant dismissal, his theatrical display of authority, it wasn't just unprofessional. It was dangerous. He was so blinded by his own prejudice against Elias's condition that he was actively rejecting information that could solve the case. He had a suspect in mind already, a low-level criminal with a history of muggings in the area, a convenient and easy target who fit the profile Miller wanted. He was shaping the evidence to fit his narrative, and Elias was a loose thread that he was trying to snip away. As they walked down the long, echoing hallway toward booking, Rossi made a decision. It was a risky one, a move that could put her career in Miller's direct line of fire. But the image of Elias's clear, certain eyes and the whispered detail about the pen under the dumpster had lodged in her conscience like a shard of glass. She couldn't ignore it. She couldn't let Miller crush this man and potentially let a murderer walk free just to protect his own fragile ego. She would process Elias as ordered. But then, she was going to make a call. And after that, she was going to pay a visit to a certain dumpster in a dark downtown alley. The holding cell was a cube of concrete and despair. A single bare slab served as a bed, and the air was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 other miserable nights. For Elias, however, the stark emptiness was almost a relief. The outside world, with its endless chaotic torrent of sensory input, was exhausting. Here, in the gray silence, he could retreat. He sat on the edge of the concrete slab, closed his eyes, and let the memories come. It wasn't like remembering for other people. It wasn't a hazy recollection or a summarized event. For Elias, the past was not past. It was a place he could visit. He was standing in the alley again, the cold night air sharp against his face, the smell of rain on asphalt, the distant wail of a siren, the low thrum of the city. It was all there, as real as the concrete beneath him. He was not just recalling the murder, he was reliving it. He saw the two men, Richard Sterling, the victim, his face flushed with anger, his voice a clipped aristocratic bark, and the other man, the one he knew as Julian Croft. He saw the tension in Croft's shoulders, the tight set of his jaw. He heard the words, an argument about money, about betrayal.
"You ruined me, Richard. You took everything."
Croft's voice was tight, strained, a wire pulled to its breaking point. Elias's memory was a high-fidelity recording. He saw the way Sterling laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. "I gave you an opportunity. You were too weak to handle it. That's not my fault. It's yours." Then, the flash of motion. It wasn't the knife from the official report. Not at first. It was the pen. Croft, his face a mask of fury, lunged forward and stabbed the sharp point of the Mont Blanc into Sterling's neck, just below the ear, a fountain of dark blood. Sterling staggered back, his eyes wide with shock, clutching at the wound. Then Croft pulled the knife, a small, wicked-looking switchblade, and the attack became a frenzy. It was brutal, vicious, over in seconds. Elias's mind recorded it all without filter, without judgment. The spatter of blood on the brick wall, forming a constellation of tiny red stars. The clatter of the silver pen as Croft dropped it in his haste. The way he fumbled with his wallet, his hands shaking, before sprinting away into the darkness. Elias had remained, a silent statue, his mind trying to process, to file, to order the deluge of new, terrible information that had just been forced upon it. He remembered something else too. A different room, years ago. This one was warm, filled with books and the scent of old paper and lemon tea. A kind-faced man with a neatly trimmed white beard sat across from him. Dr. Alistair Finch. He was the first person who hadn't looked at Elias like he was broken. "Your mind is not a disease, Elias," Finch had said, his voice a calm, reassuring melody. "It is a library. Most people's libraries are messy. Books are out of order, pages are torn, some volumes are lost entirely. Your library is perfect. Every book is in its place, every word pristine. But the doors are always open, and the wind is always blowing. It must be overwhelming." Elias had simply nodded, the description resonating with a truth he had never been able to articulate. "The world is not built for minds like yours," Finch had continued. "It is built for forgetfulness. Forgiveness is a form of forgetting. Moving on is a form of forgetting. Society functions on a bedrock of shared amnesia. You are a threat to that. When you tell people you remember everything, they will not believe you. They will fear you. They will call you a liar, or they will call you mad." Finch had then handed him a small, simple business card. It held only a name and a number. "This is my private line. I have made certain people aware of your condition. They are people in positions of influence who understand the value of a perfect witness. If you ever find yourself in a situation where the world refuses to see what you see, where your truth is being buried, you have someone memorize this number and call it. Do not carry the card. Remember it. You, of all people, can trust your memory." Back in the suffocating gray of the holding cell, Elias opened his eyes. He had recited that number to himself every day for 7 years. It was as much a part of him as his own name. He had never needed it. Until now. Meanwhile, Detective Rossi was moving with a quiet, determined urgency. She had finished processing Elias's paperwork, her fingers typing the false charge of obstruction with a sense of deep shame. Miller had already left for the day, swaggering out of the precinct with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had tidied up a messy problem. He had briefed the district attorney's office. They were fast-tracking the case against the mugger, a man named Leo Gant. Gant had a record, was found with $100 in his pocket, and had given a shaky, terrified alibi. For Miller, it was case closed. Rossi went to the evidence locker first. She signed out the preliminary crime scene logs and the photos. In her small, cluttered cubicle, away from prying eyes, she spread them out under her desk lamp. She scanned the logs, her eyes flying over the pages, and then she found it. Log entry 7B from the initial CSU sweep. Small, cylindrical metallic object visible under dumpster number 3, east side of alley. Area currently unstable due to refuse pile. Retrieval pending secondary sweep. It was vague, but it was there. A corroboration of the impossible. Next, she ran the name. Julian Croft. No criminal record. She expanded the search. There he was. Julian Croft, CFA, a portfolio manager for a major investment firm. She pulled up his corporate headshot. Dark hair, styled. A clean-shaven, handsome face. He looked nothing like the scruffy, desperate Leo Gant. She kept digging. She found an article from a financial journal 6 months ago about a massive fund collapse at a rival firm. The fund had been managed by Croft. The article mentioned he had been mentored by and later pushed out of a major deal by the very man who was now dead, Richard Sterling. The motive was there, buried in the dry language of financial reporting. Betrayal, ruin, everything Elias had heard. Her hands were trembling slightly. This was no longer a hunch. It was a conspiracy of incompetence led by her own superior officer. She looked at the clock. 10 p.m. She grabbed her jacket. The alley would be dark, cordoned off, but accessible to a detective with a badge. The crime scene tape fluttered like yellow prayer flags in the damp night wind. Rossi ducked under it, her flashlight beam cutting a sharp white cone through the darkness. The alley smelled of decay and stale rainwater. It was a wound in the city's side. She counted the dumpsters. 1, 2, 3. The third one was a mountain of overflowing trash bags and sodden cardboard, leaning precariously. Just as the report said, it was unstable. Using her heavy-duty flashlight to push aside a heap of stinking refuse, she knelt, aiming the beam into the dark, filthy space beneath the rusted metal container. For a moment she saw nothing but grime and shadows. Then, a flicker of reflected light. It was small, almost lost in the filth. Carefully, using a pen from her pocket, she hooked it and dragged it out into the open. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a fountain pen, silver, streaked with grime, but unmistakably expensive. A Mont Blanc. She wiped a section of the clip with her thumb. And there it was. So small, she almost couldn't believe it was real. A tiny, exquisitely detailed engraving of a soaring eagle. It was true, all of it. She stood up, her mind racing. She couldn't go to Miller. He would bury it. He would accuse her of planting it, of insubordination. He would destroy her career to save his case. She couldn't go to the DA's office. They were already in Miller's pocket. She was alone. No, not alone. She thought of Elias sitting in that cell, the one person who knew the whole truth, dismissed and silenced. She thought of the name he had given her, Dr. Alistair Finch. It was a crazy, desperate long shot, but it was the only one she had. Back at the precinct, she found a deserted office and used a landline, not her cell. She didn't want the call traced back to her if this blew up in her face. She took a deep breath and dialed the number Elias had recited to her, a number she had written on the palm of her hand. It rang 3 times. A crisp, professional voice answered. Finch Institute, good evening. Hello, my name is Detective Isabella Rossi with the City Police, she began, her voice sounding thin to her own ears. I need to speak with Dr. Alistair Finch. It's a matter of extreme urgency. I'm sorry, the doctor is not available at this hour, the voice replied, cool and dismissive. If you'd like to leave a message. No, you don't understand, Rossi interrupted, a note of desperation creeping in. It's about a patient, a man named Elias Thorne. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and absolute. The temperature of the call dropped 20 degrees. The professional coolness was replaced by a sharp, sudden intensity. Stay on the line, the voice said, all dismissal gone. Less than 30 seconds later, a new voice came on. It was calm, measured, and radiated an authority that was both intellectual and profound. This is Dr. Finch. To whom am I speaking? Doctor, thank you for taking the call. My name is Detective Rossi. She spoke quickly, the words tumbling out of her as she explained the situation, the murder, Elias as a witness, the impossible details, the silver pen, Detective Miller's dismissal, the obstruction charge, the holding cell. Finch listened without interruption. He did not question or challenge a single word. When she was finished, breathless, there was a moment of contemplative silence. Detective Rossi, he said, and his voice was like a granite pillar. You have done the right thing. Your instincts are commendable. You have stumbled into a situation of profound injustice, and you have acted with integrity. Relief washed over Rossi so powerfully her knees felt weak. He believed her. Now, listen to me very carefully, Finch continued, his tone shifting from contemplative to commanding. My associate was correct. This is a matter of extreme urgency. Elias's safety is now our primary concern. Do not let them transfer him to a county facility. Do not let that detective near him again. Keep him in that holding cell under your personal supervision if you must. Tell your superiors you're following up on a new lead, a confidential one. Stall them? Can you do that? Yes, I can, Rossi said, her own voice finding a new strength. Good, Finch said. I am mobilizing my legal team. I'm also contacting a friend at the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Behavioral Analysis Unit. I'm on my way to you now. I'm 2 hours out by plane, but when I arrive, I will not be coming alone, and we will be bringing proof of a kind your Detective Miller cannot dismiss. He paused, and his final words were heavy with grim promise. The world is about to be reminded that the truth does not care about prejudice. We will see you in the morning, Detective. Keep him safe. The line went dead. Rossi hung up the phone, her hand resting on the receiver for a long moment. A storm was coming. She had just called down the thunder, and it was heading straight for her precinct, straight for Detective Miller. A small, fierce smile touched her lips. For the first time all night, she felt a glimmer of hope. Justice, it seemed, had found an unlikely ally. The next morning broke gray and damp, the sky the color of unpolished steel. The preliminary hearing for Leo Gant was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the downtown courthouse, a grand, aging building of marble and dark wood that always smelled faintly of floor polish and old paper. It was designed to project an image of solemn, unassailable justice, an image that was about to be shattered. Detective Miller was in his element. He wore his best suit, a navy blue pinstripe that was still a little too tight in the shoulders. He stood in the hallway outside courtroom 4B, holding court with the junior prosecutor, a young, ambitious man named Harris. Miller was expansive, confident, his voice booming as he recounted the brilliance of his rapid arrest. It was textbook, Miller declared, gesturing with a thick hand. We looked at the victim's profile, looked at the MMO, and bingo. Gant was on our radar within hours, a career scumbag, perfect fit. We bring him in, he clams up, his alibi is full of holes. It's an open and shut case, Harris. We'll have him bound over for trial before lunch. What about the other witness? Harris asked, flipping through his notes. The schizophrenic? Thorne? Miller let out a short, barking laugh. The space cadet? Don't worry about him. He's tucked away on an obstruction charge, total head case. Started babbling about custom-engraved pens and guys named Julian. We'll get him declared incompetent to stand trial, and that'll be the end of it. He's a non-issue. He clapped Harris on the shoulder. Trust me, I know how to read a witness, and that one was a novel written in crayon. Inside the precinct, Rossi was fighting a quiet, desperate battle. She had done as Finch had instructed. She had flagged Elias's file for further questioning on a sensitive, developing lead, a procedural maneuver that would keep him in the precinct holding cell for at least a few more hours. But the clock was ticking. The transport to county jail was scheduled for noon. She had barricaded herself in her duties, avoiding Miller and the questions she knew would come. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart leaped into her throat. At 9:45 a.m., her desk phone rang. It was an internal call. Rossi. It's Finch. The doctor's voice was crisp. We've landed. We're 5 minutes from the courthouse. Is the hearing for the other suspect proceeding? Yes, sir. It started at 10. Miller's already there, testifying. Perfect, Finch said. I need you to do one more thing, detective, and this will require courage. I need you to bring Elias to that courtroom, now. Rossi's blood ran cold. On what grounds? Miller will have me fired on the spot. The judge will hold me in contempt. Tell the bailiff you have exculpatory evidence pertaining to the hearing in progress and a material witness in custody. It's the truth. My lawyer is already there in the gallery. His name is Marcus Thorne. No relation to Elias, ironically. He will handle the judge. Just get Elias there. Can you do it, detective? She looked through the door of the small office toward the holding cells. She thought of Elias sitting alone in the dark. She thought of the silver pen in an evidence bag on her desk. She thought of Miller's smug, arrogant face. Yes, she said, her voice firm. I can. The courtroom was hushed, the proceedings unfolding with a dreary bureaucratic rhythm. Leo Gant, the defendant, sat beside his overworked public defender, his face pale with terror. He looked like a cornered animal, too frightened to even comprehend the complex legal machinery that was grinding him into dust. Detective Miller was on the witness stand, luxuriating in the spotlight. He was painting a masterful picture for the judge, a stern, tired-looking woman named Judge Albright. He detailed the case against Gant, the proximity, the criminal history, the flimsy alibi. He was the hero of his own story, the brilliant detective who had cut through the noise to find the simple, obvious truth. And you're certain, detective, the prosecutor asked, leading him toward the grand finale, that Mr. Gant is the man responsible for this heinous crime? In my professional opinion, with 30 years of experience on the force, Miller said, his voice resonating with false humility, there is no doubt in my mind. It was at that exact moment that the grand oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. They didn't just open, they were pushed with a force that made them bang against their stoppers, the sound echoing through the cavernous room like a double-barreled shotgun blast. Every head in the room swiveled. The proceedings screeched to a halt. Framed in the doorway stood two figures. The first was a tall, impeccably dressed man with a shock of white hair and a gaze of piercing intelligence. Dr. Alistair Finch. His presence alone was enough to command attention, but it was the entourage behind him that caused a collective gasp to ripple through the gallery. Flanking him were two men in dark, severe suits who moved with the coiled, economic grace of federal agents. Behind them were two more individuals, a man and a woman, carrying heavy-looking briefcases. They didn't look like lawyers. They looked like a response team. Judge Albright, her face a mask of cold fury at the interruption, banged her gavel. "What is the meaning of this? This is a court of law, not a theater. I will have you removed for contempt." Dr. Finch took a single step forward, his polished shoes making no sound on the marble floor. He completely ignored the judge. His eyes scanned the room, bypassing the sputtering prosecutor, the stunned detective on the stand, and the terrified defendant. His gaze landed on a single man sitting in the third row of the public gallery, a handsome, well-dressed man in a charcoal gray suit who had, until that moment, been watching the proceedings with a detached, almost academic interest. Julian Croft. For a fraction of a second, Croft's composure cracked. A flicker of pure animal panic flashed in his eyes before he quickly masked it, but Finch had seen it, and so had the federal agents flanking him. Before the judge could explode, a man in the front row stood up. "Your Honor, Marcus Thorne, counsel for the Finch Institute, I beg the court's indulgence. We are here on a matter directly related to this hearing. We have new evidence that will prove, unequivocally, that the man you are about to bind over for trial is innocent." "This is highly irregular, Mr. Thorne," Judge Albright snapped, though the name Finch Institute had clearly given her pause. As she spoke, the courtroom doors opened again. This time, it was Detective Rossi, her face pale but resolute, and beside her, looking small and lost in the grandeur of the room, was Elias Thorne. His hands were cuffed in front of him. Miller, on the witness stand, shot to his feet. "What the hell is this? Rossi, I gave you an order. Your Honor, this is my insubordinate officer and a delusional witness I had arrested for obstruction. They have no place here." This was the moment, the collision of two worlds, the world of Miller's brute force certainty and the world of Elias's perfect, crystalline truth. Finch finally turned his attention to the bench, but he addressed the entire room. "My name is Dr. Alistair Finch. I'm the director of the Institute for Cognitive and Neurological Sciences. For the past decade, my colleagues and I have been the primary researchers studying a unique phenomenon of memory known as hyperthymesia. We have had the privilege of studying the most profound case of this condition ever documented. That case belongs to the man you see standing there in handcuffs, Mr. Elias Thorne." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Miller's face, which had been red with anger, began to pale. "Mr. Thorne does not have a bad memory, nor is he delusional in the way you understand it," Finch continued, his voice a powerful, resonant instrument of truth. "He has a perfect autobiographical memory. He does not recall the past, he relives it with full sensory detail. What has been misdiagnosed and dismissed as schizophrenia is, in fact, the neurological consequence of a brain that cannot forget anything. It is a state of being, not a pathology. He is, without exaggeration, the most reliable witness who has ever lived." Finch gestured to one of his associates, who stepped forward and opened a briefcase. "We have brought Mr. Thorne's brain scans, my peer-reviewed and published research on his condition, and sworn affidavits from the world's leading neurologists attesting to his ability." Miller was stammering now, shrinking in the witness chair that had, moments before, been his throne. This is a circus. He's a nutcase. He told me some crazy story." "He told you the truth," Finch cut in, his voice like ice. "A truth you were too arrogant and too prejudiced to hear. And now, with the court's permission, he will show you." Judge Albright, her face a mixture of shock, intrigue, and dawning fury at the potential miscarriage of justice unfolding in her courtroom, looked from Finch to Miller to the terrified Leo Gant. "A demonstration, Doctor?" "Indeed, Your Honor," Finch said. "A demonstration." He turned to Rossi. "Detective, would you be so kind as to remove Mr. Thorne's restraints?" Rossi, with a triumphant glance at the utterly broken Miller, unlocked Elias's cuffs. Another of Finch's team had already set up a large artist's easel and a blank sheet of poster board in the center of the courtroom floor. They handed Elias a piece of charcoal. Elias looked at the blank page, and for a moment he seemed to retreat, overwhelmed by the eyes on him. Finch walked to his side and spoke to him softly, his voice inaudible to the rest of the room. "Elias, just the alley, just the man's face. Show them what you see." Elias nodded, a single, small motion. He raised the charcoal to the paper, And then he began to draw. A profound silence fell over the courtroom. The only sound was the soft rhythmic scratch of charcoal on paper. Elias's hand moved with a speed and certainty that was mesmerizing. He was not sketching or guessing. He was tracing. Lines appeared, forming the structure of a face, an eye rendered with such detail you could see the reflection of the alley lights in the pupil, a nose, a mouth twisted in a snarl of rage. The room watched, utterly captivated. It was not just art, it was an act of creation, of pulling a perfect image from the ether of memory and making it real. Miller stared, his mouth agape, his face the color of ash. He was watching his career, his reputation, and his entire worldview burn to the ground in strokes of black charcoal. Slowly, a face emerged, a handsome face, now contorted with murderous fury. It was a face no one in the room recognized, except for three people: Dr. Finch, who had seen it in Elias's memory before, the two federal agents who were now slowly, silently, beginning to move from their positions, and the man himself, Julian Croft, who was still sitting in the gallery, frozen in his seat, his face a deathly white mask of horror. The drawing was a perfect mirror of his soul at its ugliest moment. Elias finished. He added one last detail, a single, stray gray hair just above the right temple. He stepped back. "Your Honor," Finch said into the ringing silence, "I present to you the face of the man who murdered Richard Sterling." As he spoke, his other associate turned on a projector. An image flashed onto a portable screen set up beside the easel. It was a grainy, high-angle security still, time-stamped from the night of the murder. It had been pulled from a private camera on an adjacent building that the police investigation had missed. The image was blurry, the lighting poor, but the face, angled up toward the camera for just a second, was unmistakable. It was the same face. The drawing was not an artist's rendering, it was a forensic document. "And," Finch said, his voice dropping, "the man in that photograph, the man in that drawing, is in this courtroom today." Every person in the gallery, every officer, every lawyer, turned as one to follow Finch's gaze. It landed, like a physical weight, on Julian Croft. The spell was broken. Croft let out a strangled cry and bolted from his seat, shoving people aside as he scrambled for the doors. But he didn't get 2 steps. The 2 men in suits, the federal agents, moved with terrifying speed, converging on him and slamming him against the wall with brutal efficiency. The sound of his body hitting the wood paneling echoed through the room. Chaos erupted. People were shouting, the bailiffs were rushing forward, and Judge Albright was hammering her gavel, her voice cracking with rage. "Order! Order in this court!" Amid the pandemonium, Detective Miller simply slid down in the witness chair, his head in his hands. He was a ruin, a monument to his own hubris. He had been so sure, so arrogant, and he had been so catastrophically, publicly wrong. He had not just missed the killer, he had actively tried to silence the one person who could identify him. Rossi stood beside Elias, a protective hand on his arm. Elias himself seemed unfazed by the chaos he had unleashed. He was looking at his drawing, his head tilted, as if checking its accuracy one last time. He had simply reported what he saw. The world, for once, had finally listened. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Judge Albright, her face a thundercloud of judicial fury, slammed her gavel one last time. "All charges against Mr. Leo Gant are dismissed with prejudice. This hearing is concluded." Her glare, directed at the prosecutor's table and the still crumpled form of Detective Miller, was hot enough to melt steel. "Counsel!" she barked at the stunned prosecutor. "And whatever is left of you, detective, you will be in my chambers in 5 minutes. And you had better have an explanation for this travesty of justice." As federal agents hauled a struggling, shouting Julian Croft out of the courtroom, a swarm of media who had been loitering in the hallway descended like vultures, but they never got near Elias. Dr. Finch and his team formed a tight, protective circle around him, a human shield of quiet, unassailable authority. They moved with purpose, guiding Elias toward a private exit, away from the flashing cameras and shouted questions. Just before they reached the door, a figure blocked their path. It was Detective Miller. He He had peeled himself out of the witness chair, his face a ghastly shade of pale, his suit hanging on him now like a shroud. His arrogance was gone, stripped away, leaving behind a hollowed-out, broken man. He looked at Elias, his eyes pleading. He started, his voice a dry, cracking whisper. I don't know what to say. I was wrong. The admission was a pathetic squeak, a mouse's apology for a lion's error. Elias looked at him. There was no triumph in his pale blue eyes. No, I told you so. There was only a vast, weary sadness. It was the sadness of a man who had been screaming the truth into a hurricane for his entire life, only to be heard by accident. He didn't respond to the apology. He simply stated a fact, the same way he had stated all the others. You didn't listen, he said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of a final judgment. The details always matter. You have to listen to the details. The simple, quiet observation was more devastating than any shouted accusation. It wasn't a condemnation of Miller's mistake, but of the very foundation of his character. He hadn't just failed to see the truth, he had refused to look for it. Finch put a gentle hand on Elias's shoulder and guided him past the frozen detective, leaving Miller alone in the middle of the corridor, a man suddenly and irrevocably erased. The epilogue of Detective Miller's career was written in the cold bureaucratic language of internal affairs reports and disciplinary hearings. The public humiliation in the courtroom was only the beginning. The Elias Thorne case, as it came to be known, triggered a full-scale investigation into Miller's past convictions. A pattern emerged, a history of locking onto convenient suspects, of dismissing contradictory evidence, of bullying witnesses and junior officers into compliance. He was a hammer who saw every problem as a nail, and the department for years had praised him for how hard he could swing. He was suspended, then fired. He lost his pension. His name, once a byword for a tough, effective cop, became a verb in the precinct. To pull a Miller was to let ego and prejudice blind you to the obvious truth, to sacrifice justice for the sake of an easy narrative. He tried to find work in private security, but the story was too famous, his disgrace too public. He ended up a bitter, forgotten man, haunted by the memory of a charcoal drawing and the quiet, damning words of the man he had called a nutcase. The ripples of that day in court spread far beyond one detective's career. The case became a national sensation, a modern parable about perception, prejudice, and the nature of truth. Dr. Finch, using the immense publicity, spearheaded a campaign for legal reform. A new set of protocols, informally dubbed the Elias Laws, were developed and proposed for handling neurodivergent witnesses and those with extraordinary cognitive abilities. The guidelines, created by a panel of neurologists, legal scholars, and law enforcement experts, with Detective Rossi serving as a key consultant, focused on listening, documenting, and verifying rather than dismissing. Mandatory training programs on cognitive diversity were slowly implemented in police departments across the country, forcing officers to question their own biases. Elias, the quiet center of the storm, vanished from the public eye. He accepted Dr. Finch's offer to live at the Institute, a sprawling, peaceful campus in the countryside. It was a sanctuary, a place where his mind was not a burden but a subject of wonder. He was given a large, sunlit studio, filled with canvases and art supplies. He was no longer a witness or a patient. He was an artist in residence. For the first time in his life, he was surrounded by people who understood the language of his mind. Months later, a man appeared at the gates of the Institute. He was thinner, grayer, and his shoulders were slumped with a permanent weary weight. It was Marcus Miller. He had requested a meeting, and to his surprise, it had been granted. He found Elias in his studio. The room was breathtaking. The walls were covered in vast, sprawling canvases. But Elias wasn't painting alleys or crime scenes. He was painting life. One canvas depicted a crowded city street, but every single face in the crowd was rendered with perfect individual detail, each one telling a story. Another showed the night sky, but instead of stars, it was filled with the faces of every person Elias had ever met, arranged in constellations of connection and memory. It was the world as only he could see it, an infinite, interconnected tapestry of moments. Elias was working on a new mural, a vast chronological depiction of his own life. It started with the fuzzy, overwhelming sensory input of infancy and moved through the years, moments of quiet joy and stark terror given equal, unflinching detail. Miller stood in the doorway, humbled and intimidated by the sheer scale of the memory on display. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice quiet. "Elias." Elias turned, his charcoal-dusted fingers holding a cloth. He simply waited. "I came to apologize," Miller said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Not like before. I mean it. What I did was unforgivable. I was arrogant. I was a bully. I was wrong. I see that now. I've lost everything, and I deserve to. I'm trying to be better, to listen, like you said." Elias looked at the man for a long moment. He saw the truth of his ruin, the sincerity born of utter defeat. He did not offer absolution. He did not say, "I forgive you." Forgiveness, a form of forgetting, was a luxury his mind did not afford. Instead, Elias turned back to his mural. His eyes scanned the long painted timeline of his existence. He found the section depicting the interrogation room, the holding cell, the courtroom. It was all there, rendered in stark, painful detail. Miller's sneer, Rossi's worried frown, the glint of light on the silver pen. Then, his gaze moved past it to a vast, empty white space at the very end of the canvas. The future, the yet-to-be-remembered. He looked back at the broken man in the doorway. "What you do now," Elias said, his voice not unkind, but as clear and solid as stone, "is what will decide the rest of the drawing." He then picked up his charcoal, turned back to the wall, and began to fill in the memory of that very moment, leaving Miller standing on the precipice between his past and his future, with the quiet, profound realization that his redemption would not be given, but would have to be drawn, one new, better memory at a time. The choice for the very first time was his.